NTV.
A very good morning. We're glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. If you're just joining us, welcome on board. We are broadcasting live from the Kampala Serena Conference Center, and this is the Kickstarter discussion in, of course, the greater thick of things for Morning at NTV. Our topic this morning is the added advantage of COP27 to African youth. Now, COP27 is the iconic conference that brings together all actors, including those that want a better world as it battles the climate crisis. Let me just give you a preamble before I introduce the guests who are going to be helping us understand some of the issues at hand and the dynamics therein. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, about 570 million children globally are currently highly exposed to flooding, and this is likely to worsen because of climate change. In recent years, Uganda has faced serious and extreme weather events which have had a toll on the lives and of course livelihoods of many youth that are involved in agriculture. The region has already warmed by 1.3 degrees Celsius, and both droughts and the heavy rainfall are expected to become more intense as a result of this phenomenon. Flooding and landslides are common occurrences in Uganda and have devastating impact. Youth alone have had the challenges, but they continue of course to grapple with the problems that come with it, and they are looking at some of the solutions that were arrived at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Here to help us understand exactly what that means for them is the chairperson of the National Youth Council, Eyeru, and of course the a climate activist, one that is formidable, and he's from the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs, Robert Kigongo. Gentlemen, many thanks for making time and joining us here on Morning at NTV for this very pertinent discussion. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are we?
Great, great.
Let's now dive straight into the discussion. The COP27 is an iconic event. Over the last 10 years, it has become the focal point in setting the pace for actions that are aimed at reversing the specter of the climate crisis. Many people are calling it climate crisis and not a climate change, because they believe whenever they say change, people take it, lightly, because some people are not very welcoming of change. But when you say crisis, then people's attention is caught. I'll begin with you, Chairman of the National Youth Council, to give me your take on what the resolutions of this particular conference were and how that reflects on the youth initiatives across the African continent.
Thank you, Higani, and a very good morning to our viewers again. About COP27, the National Youth Council was privileged to send representation because we realized that there is, just like you've hinted, there is a lot that climate is doing to the young population in our country.
That's right.
And we needed to be at the level of global conversations. How are the perspectives being built, in what direction are they moving, and how do we make sure our voices are heard and our interests are managed at that level. And so we sent representation to understand climate conversations, climate negotiations, but also achieve an angle through which young people in Uganda can benefit from climate initiatives globally and be part of a global community of young people that are now moving and advancing the course of change in climate action. I think generally one of the things that I loved about COP27 was the stance taken by our countries, the developing countries, to be able to push an agenda and see it through. At the beginning of COP27, there was an agenda set to all the participating countries. But the outcome, the most important outcome of COP27 was not even at the agenda. This is something that people need to know. It was the developing countries that organized to force the conversation of adaptation and loss and damage to be core. But principal among them was the conversation on loss and damage. And was saying basically, how do we continue bearing the effects of a climate crisis that we are not contributing to the most? We are the ones facing the biggest branch of it, but we're not the ones that have created the biggest problem for the climate. So the loss and damage fund outcome is the one that really talks to the nature of young people suffering in the third world. But just to highlight how it plays out, If you look at early marriages in our communities, our pastoral communities, whether you're looking at Karamoja or the entire cattle corridor in Uganda, or if you stretch it all the way to Kenya and the arid areas of the Horn of Africa, what you're having is that families that are pastoral families lose their cattle because of climate damage, drought and so on. And then to basically bring that back, what they do is they marry off their girls early in exchange for actual cattle. So the young people are suffering in that sense, that the girls have to be married off early so we can get back the cattle that we have lost to a climate crisis. If you look at the flooding that happens across our countries that have now become synonymous with being almost in a poor country, stories from Pakistan, stories from Mbale, the mudslides, all these things that we are having are effects of a damaged climate, a climate ecosystem that is no longer balanced, that does not have equity. Young people who are looking at their livelihoods in agriculture can no longer find that on a timetable of the rains, because we do not have that capacity. So in strengthening the language for adaptation, in creating a fund for loss and damage, the young people of Africa can be proud. But above all, I love the fact that the young people of Africa and of Uganda can finally say, we can go to a global scene where we are not on the agenda and we collaborate to force the agenda.
And force the conversation towards them. Well, that's interesting and, of course, very enlightening. Robert Kigongo, you are a climate activist and, of course, being the Secretary General at the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs. This was very pertinent to you. You followed events and, of course, did, before the event itself, the COP27, were part and parcel of the conversation that the chairperson has just alluded to. Just give me your view on what went down at Sharm el-Sheikh and whether it was exactly what you hoped to achieve.
Thank you so much, Chris. One, the viewers, good morning. Two, they need to understand what is COP. We don't elaborate this word. It's cooperation of parties.
Cooperation of parties.
Where it is a platform that was established by the UN.
Yeah.
The UN believes in people, peace, planet, partnerships, and prosperity. So climate crisis is a human crisis. The fact that the UN cares about people are humans, as we all know. And the planet, it's where we live. So it established this platform mainly to hold leaders accountable. This COP, we had 112 country heads, apart from Putin and the head of Uganda. It was a no show up. And Xi Jinping of China, but they sent representatives. They are supposed to be held accountable. It's split into two spheres. We have the global north and the global south. Global north includes Africa and oceanic countries. Global south includes Africa and the oceanic countries. Global north, that's Europe and
United States.
And United States and those parts of Asia, which are the biggest emitters. We all know that Africa contributes only 4% of the global emissions, so the rest is contributed by the global north. Even as we are looking at the new fossil fuel projects, they are all being engineered by the global north. They are companies like Total. So the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs, it's a host of civil society organizations that are youth-led. We sent representatives, though some of them had to be facilitated by other parties or partners like Oxfam. Youth Go Green is our member. It was represented by Edwin Muhumuza. We have Friday for Future, which is actually the key center of advancing climate justice. And there is no climate justice without gender justice. So we've been able to empower women to speak out, young girls to speak out. We have Hilda Nakabuye, who is Flavia Nakabuye, who is very outspoken. Patience Nabukalu. Actually, I want to take also this opportunity to welcome them back from COP27. They represented our ideas. Before we headed to COP27 in Egypt, we had activities prior. We call them pre-COP.
Pre-COP.
We had the biggest climate strike, community town halls in Mbale, Butaleja, and Palisa. We also had to train climate activists so that they can participate in the virtual spaces to create climate traffic, where we disseminate information about climate change. Not so many people are aware about climate change. They think it's about, it's an alien idea, but climate change is affecting us as human beings. The drought that you are seeing in Karamoja, the floods that you are seeing, the biggest number of refugees you are seeing, it's a result of the climate crisis. So we were able to send representatives, but these post activities led us to these reports. So we had to produce reports that we presented at COP27.
Okay, this is described as the mock COP27 report.
Yes.
Mock report.
So we brought together young people in climate spaces. We formed climate cluster groups where we exchanged ideas to present, and we had recommendations written to present, because it's a contestation of ideas. Unfortunately, this was meant to be an African COP, but it was not, because most of our young people they are accredited as observers.
As observers.
Yet you find the biggest emitters or fossil fuel financiers, they are accredited as investors. So they have access to those negotiation rooms. So our young people are only relegated to the youth and pavilion, where they don't contribute a lot in the real key decision-making processes.
Let me put this question about the involvement on the specifics, especially when it comes, for example, to aspects like carbon credits and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions across the globe. A youth from Uganda that is part of the global south, that is responsible for only 4% of greenhouse emissions, doesn't understand the emission issue and how it affects everything within their spaces. I know there was a bit of education and sensitization ahead of COP, but when you bring it home, what is being done to ensure that we understand this conversation? Because when you take them to Egypt, what are they lobbying for that they might not even understand well?
Thank you again. Again, like I said at the beginning, it was the first time the National Youth Council sponsored one of our staff to be there. Because we wanted to understand how we can get this localized. Because the challenges we had already experienced. We are the ones that receive all the information about the challenges young people are facing in the countryside. Rising out of climate, and every day, just yesterday, I got a request to sponsor seeds for someone who was telling me all his seeds didn't germinate, that have always been germinating, and that's because of the long drought. So in terms of how do we localize the language for the understanding of the basic young person, there's a lot of collaboration needed there. And the general term used is climate education, so that people are able to understand from their frames of reference, from their perspectives, that they can relate to. Just like I told you about the story of the early marriage. If they can see that in terms of climate, then they will understand that the climate conversation is good. But if you tell them, no, this is an issue of loss and damage, they don't know what loss and damage. Even our elites don't understand the language of loss and damage. But I think we are also going to get creative around activism. Why? Because some of the things, like he has pointed out, the National Youth Council was lucky to be in the negotiating rooms at COP. But activism was seemingly relegated to pavilions. You are outside the negotiating room and making some noise and sending, conversations onto social media, which is very important. But when the negotiation is happening, that's where those voices count, and if they don't count in there, because I'll tell you, like he has mentioned, one of our summary reportings that was done by the BBC noticed that companies that deal in fossil fuels are now sponsoring negotiators into the Conference of the Parties.
That's right.
And those companies are now accounting for over 50% of the members that are, because they've realized it's a very powerful platform.
It's a very powerful.
So activism needs to become innovative in terms of how do local people participate in what we are saying and understand it, but also how do we ensure that we are not lost at the global stage? Because you could have 800 people, but then the negotiating room has 10 who are very well shielded from the noise, and that noise doesn't make sense. So that's why we're saying we need to get people who are in political office, young people like myself, like other leaders, members of parliament, who have access to negotiating platforms to become part of the conversation actively on climate action. So they are the ones that can hold the government to account for how much we are putting into adaptation funding, for whether the Ministry of Environment and Water is utilizing carbon credits. For example, we have Mabira Forest. Mabira Forest in Uganda, some of us just see it as a forest when we are going through and going home, but it is a platform through which we can be financed, because what Mabira gives Uganda, what the thick forests in the rainforests of the equatorial region. One could describe
it as the lungs of the
country. Yes, actually. So we take in because the climate does not check where the emissions are coming from. The effects are everywhere. But the people that absorb those effects and lessen the degrees from going up are the people with the rainforests, and that's Uganda. Uganda can use that to market its climate action and say, look, we're preserving the forest, but we need payment for that preservation, because what he said is very important. 4% by Africa. There's a big story, and again, I thought you would bring it up, on ECOP, for example, and our oil drilling activities.
We shall be coming to that a little bit later.
So I just wanted to demonstrate. Generally, even though we're able to have such mega fossil fuel ideas, we would still not be able to reach in 30 years what countries like China do in 3 months. So the emission direction needs to be also an equity conversation. How are we getting our fair share of development from this climate talk without compromising the need to progress on climate action?
Okay, there was a debate, and this one will go to Robert Kigongo, about the fact that there is need to transition from mitigation to adaptation, because many of those that are facing the grim effects of climate change and the climate crisis are at the end of it and are unable or don't have the resources. And there was a bit of controversy on the fund and who is going to put money in it and how that money is going to be rolled out or dispersed to the countries to allow to roll out adaptation measures. Just take us through, as a country, Uganda, what is the structure or ecosystem of our adaptation strategy? How are we doing it?
One, I want to tell viewers that one of the resolutions at COP27 was the Loss and Damage Fund. However, with countries made their pledges in $1 million, but who will that money go to? At COP27, we witnessed that much as we had ideas, but the ideas that won were not actually African or from Global South. The idea that won, actually, it was from Climate Heritage Network. It advanced an agenda of culture, heritage, and art sector in advancing climate change. So I'll give you an example. They had demonstrations of how music can advance climate message, or how cultural institutions like Buganda Kingdom can protect their own treasures within the environment to advance climate action. So these are the ideas that won at COP27. So back to Uganda, the mitigations when we visited Palisa, it has a wetland called Limote. Limote is one of the biggest wetland. We also visited in Mpologoma wetland. And in Palisa,
Mpologoma stretches Palisa, Budaka, and Butaleja.
In Palisa, UNDP and partners, including Ministry of Water, they have a project of sustainable wetland management, where farmers were in those wetlands are given alternative activities. For example, those who are doing rice in the wetland were advised to do fish ponding because you have this water retained within the wetland.
Yep.
It's not, you don't have pathogens being released into the waters. So that's that was one of the, in Butaleja, we had a town hall meeting. Butaleja and all that Bukedia region, it's the most poorest region after Karamoja. But you realize their main activity was actually rice, but it wasn't giving them the same returns to improve or to elevate them from. So we gave them alternative activities, and we continue to engage the communities in sustainable wetland use. So our message was very clear. Wetland use does not mean no wetland use. So we advise them to do what we call sustainable wetland use. And we also, part of the solutions that we had, that we are advancing, is irrigation financing and climate financing. Irrigation financing, people who are doing farming activities in wetlands can be shifted to dry lands, but the dry land must have irrigation valley dams. So that's one of the solutions to climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So these are some of the issues we are advancing at the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs and other partners. Friday for Future has made sure that they train more climate activists, young activists. I think if you can go back at COP27, you can see the voice of Vanessa Nakate. Vanessa heads Rise Up movement. Yeah. But as we talk right now, Vanessa, one of our headings is added advantages. Added advantages. Vanessa is now a UNICEF ambassador, and I feel very proud of that. Okay. Each time I post Vanessa,
that relates to the question I want to pose to the chairperson of the Youth Council. Vanessa's work is iconic, no doubt. She's in the same league as Greta, the lady, and that's to Greta Thunberg. And I do not see more youth coming on board, despite the fact that Vanessa has given momentum to this drive. I don't know whether there is any collaboration between her initiatives and your work to be able to foster that gap in educating the youth on exactly how they should be activists and at the forefront when it comes to the climate crisis.
Thank you, Higani. I want to, again, this is interesting. I really acknowledge the work by people like Vanessa, Hilda, not just.
I know there are political connotations there.
Yes, not just as a young Ugandan, seeing fellow young people on the. It gives me immense joy to see young Ugandans lift our flag on global conversations. And Vanessa is way up there, and about 3, 4. But from what I have noted over the last 4 or 5 months, I have developed a fear for where climate activism is going. There seems to be, it also seems to be a very political space. There is a quiet, untold, but very ferocious competition among climate activists for attention, for whom they talk to. And it's a bit surprising because for me, I would imagine, for example, now Uganda has about 3 global, very global, strong faces. Vanessa, Hilda, and I think, I forget the third one. Flavia, is the third one. But to find them together, discussing or helping an initiative together, is something that is hard. And I think this is why, for me, I felt it is important that we got a bigger number acting while the global actors can go on. Of course, Rising has its own politics in the world, so I can accept that. I have experienced that. I know what it means. But how do we get more young people? Not everyone is going to be a global icon, but everyone can act in their capacity.
It's just like all forms of endeavors. Not everyone is the star.
Not everyone can be Messi and Cristiano, you know. But the football team has to be completed. So that's where my focus is, and that's where the focus of the National Youth Council is. And they're the things that we're now getting interested in. For example, adaptation. You spoke about adaptation. We believe very strongly that our actions, our commitment, are the first instance of our will. If we are able to say, how much is the cost of a valley dam? Because a valley dam is digging its hose and digging a big pit. That's a valley dam. It's not so much science. And I can't have a validam without even knowing that I'm doing climate adaptation.
Yeah.
But if we are able to go into communities that are affected as a National Youth Council and say we are committing to ensuring that this community has 300 validams based on our own budget lines, then we are becoming an institution that actually is addressing climate adaptation. And that's where we are going. And I agree, some of the initiatives we're looking at, one of the reasons, one of the negotiations we're having is for financing for agriculture. And some of the things we learned are very interesting. For instance, we learned that our tree planting campaign in this country, which is on specific species of trees, must focus on another kind of trees. That's what adaptation means. Yeah. Adaptation would mean that rather than going on planting mivule trees which take 50 years, and when cut down, another mivule tree will take another 50 years, you could look at bamboos. Yeah. Bamboos, even though cut down, can take another 1 year and they are all up again. And a stretch of bamboo would do maybe 1 acre of bamboo would do what 3 mivule trees would do, but you will have a better return on adaptive stances. So we are looking at those kinds of initiatives that many people can be able to contribute to. While Vanessa, Hilda, and Flavia fight at the global scene, what can we do with the local person here that causes impact at their local communities? That's where our focus is going to be.
Okay, let me later, Mr. Kigongo, just give us a bit of perspective on the African Youth-Led Businesses Award. $2 million, 20 African youth-led enterprises won the grant funding of up to $100,000 each in this year's African Youth Adaptation Solutions Challenge, which is being described as Youth Adapt competition. The program is specifically for youth-led enterprises, which is, and those youth-led enterprises must be led 50% by women. Just tell us about that and how that initiative is working out.
Well, that initiative, we've been invited to Zurich in Switzerland next week to discuss it further. So apparently we have no concrete details towards it, but I believe in Zurich we shall have more details that we shall be sharing. Good enough, NTV is hosting us. Hope they keep doing the same. So we shall share the resolutions in Zurich. And also it's a build-up of COP27, the post-COP27, the resolutions, including the loss and damage. And also the fact that Climate Heritage Network is going to be actually taking some of that money. But there is also racial segregation and generation segregation. Oh. Yes, because when you look at the people within the Climate Heritage Network, they are not black people. They are not our boys and girls here. I've had to hold a discussion. I've had to hold a discussion with one of the participants that we sent, Patricia Namirembe, and Friday for Future. She told me that it's very, very hard for us to tap into this resource unless we have to go and adopt or to talk to cultural institutions are the ones that are supposed to access this fund. So I'll also give you an example of Brahemian Palace. It's a palace like the way you see Mengo Palace. It also introduced robots to detect climate effects of climate change. So it's a technology that they want us to advance to, and also to encourage
that could be a little bit too
cultural
much for
institutions participate in this space. So the space, meaning young people who are participating in this space have been curtailed to tap into these resources. So these are some of the issues that we are going to advance radically in Zurich.
All right, let me give the last word to the chairperson of the National Youth Council. Especially, you spoke about the tendency for things to get a bit political. What should we do? Very quickly.
On climate, we need to be very assertive on our agenda as Uganda, but also as young politicians, because conversations of climate are conversations from the future.
That's right.
If we are not going to talk about them, we will still not avoid them. You know, so in TESO we have a small term. It's Ogesek. Ogesek means you start early if you want to achieve very much.
That's right.
So that's what we are doing now. And one of the things that we are going to focus on with the National Youth Council is to work with Green Frontiers to be able to look at how they can help us run a climate agenda. Because as politicians, truth is we are not able to focus on the climate agenda. There are so many things we're focusing on. But collaboratively, we are able to say, can we outsource knowledge from Green Frontiers, from Friday for Future, from actors all over, and be able to work with them.
All right, gentlemen, many thanks. Jacob Eyeru, the chairperson of the National Youth Council, and Robert Kigongo, Secretary General at the Uganda Youth Coalition for SDGs and renowned climate activist. Many thanks for the perspective on this very pertinent issue. We now go for a break, but we shall be speaking to Juma Kiria, who is in Nakasero, on what is no doubt a very important and contentious topic in the country, borders and the streamlining of that business.